At 76, I finally understand why my father never said, "I love you." He never once told me he loved me, and I spent 76 years resenting him for it until I finally understood why. My name is Samuel Kowalski. I'm 76 years old. Last year, I discovered letters that explained a silence I'd carried as a wound my entire life. My father was born in Poland in 1920. His name was Jerzy Kowalski, though he went by George after coming to America. I grew up knowing almost nothing about his life before he arrived in the United States in 1949. He didn't talk about Poland, the war, or his past. We had a few faded photographs of relatives I never met, unsmiling faces in black and white. My father never explained who they were or what happened to them. What I did know about my father was that he was distant. Not cruel, not neglectful, but emotionally unreachable. He worked as a machinist in a Pittsburgh factory, came home at the same time, ate dinner in silence, read the newspaper, and went to bed early. On weekends, he worked on the house, fixing things. He was competent in practical ways, ensuring I was fed, clothed, and safe. But there was no warmth, no affection, no words of love. I have no memories of my father hugging me. No memories of him telling me he was proud, even when I brought home good grades or won awards. No memories of him saying he loved me, not once. When I graduated, married, had children, or achieved success, he was present but silent, watching from the sidelines. My mother tried to compensate. She was warm and affectionate, told me she loved me constantly, hugged me, praised me. But there was a sadness in her too, something I didn't understand when I was young. She'd married my father in a displaced persons camp in Germany in 1948. They'd come to America together as refugees. She'd tried to build a happy family, but my father's silence hung over everything like a shadow. Growing up, I resented my father's coldness. I watched other kids with their fathers, saw them playing catch, saw the easy affection between them. I tried everything to earn his approval, his affection, some sign that he cared. I excelled in school, behaved well, helped around the house. Nothing worked. He remained distant, impassive, locked behind walls I couldn't penetrate. My resentment turned to anger. I decided he was simply incapable of love, that something was broken in him. I told myself I would be different with my own children, and I was different. I told my children I loved them every day. I hugged them, encouraged them, expressed pride in their accomplishments. But even as I succeeded in being a more openly loving father, I carried the wound of his silence with me. It shaped how I saw myself. My father died in 1992 at 72. I was 45. Even at the end, he never said the words. He died without ever saying it, and I grieved him with a mixture of sadness, anger, and unresolved pain. My mother lived another 18 years. She would occasionally try to explain him, saying, "Your father had a very hard life before you were born." Or, "He loved you in his own way. He just couldn't show it." But she never gave me details, never explained what had happened to make him so shut down. When my mother died in 2010, I inherited the house. It took me months to sort through decades of accumulated belongings. Inside were documents in polish, a few photographs I'd never seen, and a bundle of letters tied with string. I couldn't read the Polish documents, but I took them to a woman at my church. What she told me changed everything I thought I understood about my father. The documents were from the war. My father had been 21 when Germany invaded Poland in 1939. He'd been rounded up and sent to a forced labor camp. He'd spent 6 years in that camp, from 1939 to 1945, doing brutal physical work under horrific conditions. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was what happened to his family. My father had been engaged to be married when the war started. Her name was Zofia. They'd planned to marry in the fall of 1939. When my father was taken, Sophia and his entire family were forced into the Warsaw Ghetto. None of them survived. Sophia died in the ghetto in 1942, along with my father's mother and his youngest sister. His father and two other siblings were sent to Treblinka in 1943 and murdered there. My father learned all of this after the war ended. He'd lost everyone. His fiancée, his parents, his siblings. Everyone he'd loved had been killed, and he'd survived alone. The letters in the lockbox were from the years immediately after the war, 1945 to 1948, written to a friend who'd also survived the camps. In these letters, my father wrote about his grief, about his guilt at surviving when everyone he loved had died, about his inability to feel anything anymore. He wrote, "I am empty inside. I survived, but I am not alive. I cannot feel love or joy or hope. These things died with Zofia and my family." He wrote about meeting my mother in the displaced persons camp. He described her as kind and good, someone who deserved better than him. He wrote, "She wants to build a life together, to have children, to be happy. I do not think I can give her these things. I do not think I can be what she needs, but I am alone, and she is alone, and perhaps two broken people can survive together even if they cannot be whole." He wrote about coming to America, about trying to start fresh, about hoping that maybe in a new country he could leave his grief behind. But he also wrote, "I thought distance would help, but the dead stay with me. I see Zofia's face every day. I hear my mother's voice. The guilt of living when they died does not fade. I do not deserve happiness. I do not deserve love. I survived and they did not, and I cannot forgive myself for that." The letters stopped after 1948, around the time I would have been conceived. These letters from those 3 years told me everything I needed to know. He'd loved people once. He'd been engaged to be married. He'd had a family he cared about. And all of them had been murdered while he was powerless to help them. The trauma of that, the grief and guilt and horror, had broken something in him that never healed. When I was born in 1949, my father was 29 and had already spent 10 years living through unimaginable loss. He'd watched everyone he loved die. He'd survived the camps. He'd learned that love meant devastating pain, that attachment meant unbearable loss. So he'd protected himself the only way he knew how, by not allowing himself to love again, by keeping everyone at a distance. Reading those letters, I finally understood. My father's silence wasn't about me. It wasn't because I was unlovable or because he didn't care. It was because he'd loved so much and lost so much that he couldn't let himself love again. The walls he'd built were to keep his own heart protected. I cried reading those letters at 73 years old, grieving the father I'd never understood and the young man he'd been before the war destroyed him. I grieved for Zofia, who died at maybe 22 or 23, for my grandparents and aunts and uncles I'd never known existed, for all the love and life and possibility that had been murdered before I was even born. And I grieved for my father who'd survived, but had lost the ability to express love, who'd spent 43 years of my life standing next to me, but unable to close the distance between us, who died still locked behind the walls the war had forced him to build. I wish I'd known all of this while he was alive. I wish I'd understood what he'd been through, what he was carrying every single day. I wish I could have told him that I understood, that I didn't blame him, that I knew his silence wasn't rejection, but survival. But I can't do any of that. He's been dead for 32 years. All I can do is carry this new understanding forward and try to make sense of the relationship we had in light of what I now know. The anger I carried for so long has dissolved. I can't be angry at a man who'd survived the things my father survived. I can't resent him for being emotionally distant when he'd watched his entire family be murdered. The miracle isn't that he was cold. The miracle is that he functioned at all, that he got up every day and went to work and provided for a family. and tried to build some kind of normal life despite carrying that much grief and trauma. I think about the small ways he did show love, the ways I missed or dismissed because they didn't look like what I wanted. He worked every day to support our family. He maintained the house, fixed things when they broke, made sure we were safe and provided for. He came to my school events even though he sat in the back and never said anything afterward. He was there for all the major moments of my life, silent but present. These weren't the grand declarations of love I wanted, but they were what he was capable of giving. And maybe, in his own way, they were the most he could offer without risking the kind of pain he'd already experienced once and couldn't survive again. I also think about what it must have cost him to have a child at all. He'd written in those letters about not deserving love or happiness, about surviving when others died. And yet, he'd married my mother. He'd agreed to have a child. He'd built a family. Even though he must have been terrified of losing us the way he'd lost everyone else. Maybe his distance was protective, not just for himself, but for me too. Maybe some part of him thought that if he didn't love me too much, didn't get too attached, it would hurt less when something inevitably went wrong. Maybe his silence was the only way he knew to be a father while managing the terror that came with caring about someone again. I'm 76 years old now. My father has been dead longer than I knew him alive. I have children and grandchildren of my own. I've lived a full life that my father's sacrifices and hard work made possible. Even if he couldn't tell me, he loved me. And I finally understand that his silence wasn't the absence of love. It was the scar tissue of a heart that had been shattered by loss so profound that it couldn't risk being broken again. He did love me in whatever way his damaged heart was capable of loving. He just couldn't say it, couldn't show it the way I needed him to. Because the war had taken that ability from him, along with everything else. I forgive him. I wish he'd gotten help. Wish he'd found some way to heal from his trauma so we could have had a different relationship. But I understand now that he did the best he could with what he had left after the war, took almost everything from him. If you have a parent who couldn't say they loved you, who was distant or cold or emotionally unavailable, I want you to know that it might not have been about you at all. From more pain than they think they can survive, not to hurt the people on the other side of those walls. That doesn't erase the pain of growing up without the affection you needed. It doesn't make it okay that your parent couldn't give you what you deserved. But it might help to understand that their limitations came from their own wounds, their own history, their own survival mechanisms. My father never said he loved me, but he survived the camps and he built a life and he raised me and he did it all while carrying grief that would have destroyed most people. That took a kind of strength and love I'm only now at 76 beginning to truly understand. I just wish I'd understood it soon enough to tell him.